Greetings, my fellow knights. Tonight we will feel what it was like to live as an American spy inside the Soviet Union during the Cold War, to walk Moscow's crowded streets under a false name, to pass coded notes beneath the eyes of the KGB, and to balance every word and movement between survival and discovery. This immersive history was created based on David E. Hoffman's book, The Billion-Dollar Spy, and Antonio and Jonna Mendez's book, The Moscow Rules. Their work helps us step inside the quiet tension and invisible tradecraft of a life lived in constant shadow. You can find these sources and further reading in the pinned comment. And if you enjoy these journeys, you can help our circle grow by liking and subscribing. In the comments, share what other time or place you would like us to experience together. Now adjust your tie, keep your briefcase close, the operation begins. Chapter 1. A cover on the escalator. Our story begins in Moscow. Imagine you are a trade clerk in the year 1960, standing at the mouth of a deep metro hall, where a poster of Nikita Khrushchev hangs above the long escalator. The smell of wet wool rises from coats and hats beaten by the thaw, and voices bounce in quiet bursts around the tiled walls. A line moves forward with the slow patience of people who know how to wait. The steps carry down in a steady way, and hands rest on the black rubber rail out of habit more than need. Trouble is not here on the surface, not in the open, but a name on a page or a nod in a crowd can change shape by night, and a small lie can stretch into a cable that must hold. It will ask more than a nod and a wink, and more than a late night at the desk. But for now you keep your head down and ride the moving steps into work, thinking of bread, the tram, and a stale joke someone told yesterday. The day began with the same plain start as any other, and the air held the same early dampness that coats collars and cuffs. A scarf was tucked in, a gloved hand steadied, and the wheels of the day turned on simple errands. The city was wide, but the task was small enough to carry in a pocket. The steps moved, and the crowd flowed, and the morning set itself in order without fuss. Down in the station, coins clicked, tickets tore, and a quiet stream of people found gaps and angles the way water finds a channel, and nobody looked twice at a small figure with a briefcase. A clerk kept a normal pace, and stood at a spot that did not draw notice, and then walked on with the steady patience learned from long lines. There was room for small talk, though it was safer to pass on a remark about weather than to question a policy or a price. The platform had its usual shadows near the pillars, and a space near a bench where an old man always sat and read a paper that never seemed to fold. A kiosk sold papers, and a sweet bun that was always a little dry, and it offered a place to pause without giving reason. The train came, and the doors slid, and a shrug or a nod was the full measure of greeting, which was enough. The car was crowded, but there is always a way to hold a place when the day is a simple day. The steady rumble under the floor was the one sound that told the truth about time because it kept exact pace with the stations and the work ahead. Work had been in a building that looked like 100 other offices spread along a broad street, with a face of plain brick and windows that opened a palm's width in spring. A room had a long table for forms, and a few chairs that moved back an inch farther than they needed to, because the floor was not even. The paper came in stacks that grew and shrank by the hour, and it had lines for things that must be counted or agreed upon or kept in a file until someone said to move it. A clerk stamped each page with a steady hand, and there was a good rhythm to it, and there was no reason to hurry or to slow down. Talk at the table kept to safe ground, and when a friend brought a joke, it stayed soft and brief, which made it feel normal and fine. Faces were known, the small marks on the wall were known, and the mess under the window was known, and that kind of map made a day feel held. From time to time, a thought of the other task ran like a thread, thin and quick, and tucked itself away again. The habit was to keep eyes on the page and on the man across, and to let silence do the work that talk could spoil. The pen rolled smooth in fingers, and the texture of the cheap paper under the hand felt dry and a little rough. At noon there was a break, and the day moved a little more slowly, and a walk out to the street brought a change of air. The same few streets wore the same faces, and there was comfort in that, as if a city could be a friend who did not ask questions. A small shop had a clerk who always counted too carefully, and a canteen had a woman who always wiped the same corner of the counter twice. The path back to the office was a simple track in the mind, and the habit of it made the return easy. A few blocks away, the tall building with the official seal seemed close and far at the same time, and it stood as a reminder that rules stood above even the daily crowd. It was not wise to say much about it, though it made itself seen through every little form and receipt. The poster from the morning would appear again on the walk, and the face on it seemed to look across the street the way a neighbor does when he minds his own business, but notices all the same. Walking back felt like a return to a small circle drawn by the workday. A glance at a shop window was only a glance. The eye rested on a single bright ribbon in a display, and that simple bit of color made the world feel ordinary and safe. Lunch was plain, the kind that kept a person upright and in step for the afternoon hours ahead, and it came with the same tray and the same spoon. Bread with a tough crust and a thin soup made from cabbage and potato did not call for praise, but it did its job. A tea glass left a ring on the table, and the talk around it stayed on small things like a bus that never came on time, and a neighbor who played a radio too loud. Workmates sat close and leaned in to trade quick remarks that meant little but made the room feel friendly, and that was worth something. It was easy to sit at the far end and not stand out, to laugh when others laughed, and to say no more than a line or two at a time. It mattered to fit in so well that a chair remembered the shape of the person who sat in it each day. Somewhere in all of this, the line between the man and the role grew thin, which was safe, and also the point of the effort. The meal left a simple warmth in the belly, and a faint taste of weak black tea on the tongue, and that small comfort steadied the rest of the day. The afternoon stretched into a neat set of tasks that could be traced from one end to the other with a finger on a page, and this made the hours pass in a clean way. A shipment request came through, and it was processed as it should be, and a file was placed back in its drawer at the right place, and that was a small victory. A messenger came to the door to drop a packet, and it was signed for, and then life went on without a ripple anyone would notice. When a question came that could be answered in 2 safe sentences instead of 4 risky ones, the shorter form answered it. A quiet routine learned the shape of a key, the schedule of a corridor patrol, and the mood of the man who checked badges at the front desk, and it kept itself light in the pocket. Nothing in the rhythm stood out, which was the strongest protection of all. When the urge to hurry rose, it was eased back by the knowledge that the way to stay unseen was to be ordinary, and the way to be ordinary was to move with the flock. Papers slid, stamps marked, and drawers closed with the same soft push they always did. The only sound that stayed in mind was the steady clack of a typewriter 2 rooms away that counted the slow beat of the afternoon. Evening drew the color down by degrees, and the office cleared with chairs pushed in, pens capped, and the floor swept once by a man who was always the last to leave the broom closet. The street outside was a channel for steady feet, and it drew office people back to the rail, and the rail drew them down into the tunnels, and the tunnels moved them home. A breath taken at the door eased the day back out of the chest, and the walk to the station put the end in sight. A face might nod to a known face, and a hand might lift in plain greeting, and then it was gone. The plan for the night included nothing risky, only a note copied clean, a name set straight, a piece of packaging saved for later use, and a place fixed in mind for a small sign that might be needed on another day. It put a person where a person should be, and it left nothing odd in view. The path stayed wide and simple and free of small tricks, and the street did not remember those who crossed it. A sleeve brushed a door frame, and the coat picked up a line of dust that meant nothing at all. The palm on the rail felt the cool of the metal through the glove, and that touch grounded the body in the simple fact of going home. Back on the train, the car swayed, and people swayed with it, as if the whole city kept step with a pulse set under the tracks, and no one cared who watched whom. A paper lay open on a lap, and eyes moved over the same lines twice, and then a page turned. There were rules to this ride that did not need to be taught. Stand when the old need a seat, shift to make room, fold hands where they should be, keep a blank face that does not borrow trouble. A young couple whispered in a corner and hid laughter the way people do when they think no one will mind, and nobody minded. The sign above the door reminded of a stop that came and then passed, and the car emptied a little and then filled again. Bodies leaned and straightened with the start and stop of the machine, and the day held its place around them. A stray thought about what else might have been, another job, another city, a different kind of life, arrived and left without making a mark. It is strange how normal a risk can feel when it is wrapped in normal acts and common ground. The paper edge bit the thumb just enough to be felt. and that quick sting sat like a pinprick at the skin. Chapter 2. First Flat, First Codes. The first flat sat in a Khrushchevka by the tram stop, 5 floors and no lift, plain from a distance. You signed for a key at the housing desk, had a paper stamped, and opened a door on rooms that were small but enough. A suitcase was set by the window, a box of plates went on the table, and a folded coat took the chair like a guest who would not speak. The walls showed old paste where a picture once hung, and the floorboards answered with a slight give under each step. A neighbor from the landing nodded, said the name of the district, and offered the hours when hot water arrived, then smiled as if secrets were silly things of books. The window looked down on tracks set like lines on a palm, and the cars came and went steady as office hours. Each morning and evening the same pattern would hold, and the mind learned the pace the way a clerk learns a face. A move never looked like much to those outside, only one more tenant with a teapot and a wool cap, which served the plan as well as anything grand. Work papers went into the desk drawer, where plain bills already waited. A rough list of errands and names was made, the handwriting kept neat for whoever might glance. Through it all came the clear ring of the tram bell that marked the corner and kept the day honest. It felt safe to start with simple steps. You learned the stairs the first week, along with the names on the mailboxes and the habit of taking 2 steps at a time when the corridor felt slow. A boy from the 2nd floor carried coal to his aunt on the 4th, and a mechanic mended a latch with care that spoke of long winters and short tools. To blend in, walks were unhurried and greetings were brief, the kind that left no need for more words later. Doors stayed open just enough to show a mat and a pair of shoes, and there was always the sense of being seen without being marked. One morning, a hand slid along the rail while a bag of groceries was balanced, and your palm felt the chill of the metal stair rail that ran up to the 5th. That simple cold taught more than any briefing, because it said the building was honest and would tell on anyone who rushed. The flat had one large clock that ran a minute fast, and it was allowed to stay that way to build a habit of arriving early and leaving a little late. Curtains were drawn the same way every night, and a small plant was set on the sill to give the window a steady picture from the street. If jokes were told on the landing, they were laughed at politely, and nothing was added. Rhythms in the block were copied until they fit like a coat, and the coat was not taken off indoors. It was patient work that asked for no applause. The news of Yuri Gagarin came over radios like a friend knocking at every door at once, and even the quiet neighbor from down the hall stepped out to listen. The superintendent told the date twice, and a young man at the window said he knew the name from the factory paper. In the flat, you moved the set closer to the table, and the broadcast ran steady from morning until it seemed part of the ceiling. Pride in the block rose in a way that was easy to mirror, because it was real and did not need polishing. On the corner, an elderly man said that Nikita Khrushchev would be pleased, and a cashier in the kiosk counted change with an extra tap for luck. The story of the first orbit passed from stair to courtyard, and all eyes lifted in thought as if something small were moving up there. A small note was made in the pad kept by the phone, a reminder that joy in the air could be used to lower suspicion about who talked to whom. Later that night, the set was turned on again, and the hour asked for small motions and plain thought. The crackle of the speaker gave the moment a rough edge that made it feel close. It helped to smile when neighbors smiled, and it helped to nod when they nodded. It became another lesson in living the block. The day ended as it had begun, steady and mindful, with hands busy and thoughts kept small. Simple signals were learned in steps that would pass for chores if anyone looked long. You opened a curtain to a regular measure each morning, and on 2 evenings a week it was drawn slightly more, as if a hand had been careless. On laundry day, a towel with a thin red border was pinned to the line, the placement made to look casual, the same row every time. A newspaper left outside a door turned right or left became a safe way to set a clock between 2 people at opposite ends of the yard. None of it needed long talks or special tools, only patience and a respect for the routines others already loved. The woman who boiled potatoes on the landing stove chatted about bus tickets, and she never noticed if a fellow tenant chose to hang a dishcloth in a new spot. A chessboard placed by the window on Sundays read as a habit and nothing more, though the game also fixed a time that could be seen from the street. Tests were kept small enough that no one's pride would be touched, and no rumor would find food. A companion from the office stood by the kiosk once and counted to 100, then walked on, ready to nod if the timing matched. The same towel with the thin red border hung in its place on the line, a small square that served the plan and could pass for washing. It felt ordinary enough to be safe. Days at the office settled into a pace that made cover feel like ordinary life, with ledgers to check and shipments to track from one depot to another. A calendar by your desk showed a factory skyline, and on Fridays a colleague would bring a joke before starting on numbers. Talk moved where talk always moved, to prices, to trains that ran late, and to the latest promise that the leader had made about better harvests. When Nikita Khrushchev came up in the break room, it was safe to agree that corn would fix many things, and then it was safer to shrug and change the subject. The day's work gave reason to carry a bag and to walk through parts of the city without drawing a map in anyone else's head. A walk to the warehouse could hide a pause near a phone booth and a glance at a clock, and a return could stand for diligence and nothing more. At the desk, a chipped cup sat where it always sat, and it was raised from time to time to keep the rhythm that made questions seem rude. The cup held weak tea that left the tongue feeling clean and without weight, and that plain taste made the hours seem sturdy. Files were closed at the same time each afternoon, and a corner of the top sheet was folded as a mark that mattered only to one person. You kept the fold neat and private, and no one needed to see it to know that work had been done. Order was the friend of a quiet life. Evenings were given to small drills that would look like tidying up if anyone stopped by. You used a pencil to write pairs of numbers that stood for days and places already known to both sides of an understanding, and the note was kept in a pocket where it would never be seen by chance. A story from training said that simple beats complex when eyes are on you, so the plan kept to plain signs that matched the life around them. The first codes were not words of mystery, but a habit of turning a page or setting a book on its spine at a certain hour. A short list was memorized and then destroyed, and a second list was folded into thoughts that could not be searched. Chess with a neighbor gave steady cover, and each move counted a minute, while hands kept easy on the pieces. When the board was cleared, the notebook came out, and a new set of pairs went down in neat columns under the lamp. The wood of the pencil felt a little rough against the fingers, and that simple texture helped anchor the mind in careful steps. You closed the window halfway and left it as it was, not because of weather, but because the picture had to stay the same all week. If another tenant looked in, they saw nothing but a quiet person making notes about work. It stayed quiet because quiet was the rule there in that small room. Once the flat and the office felt steady, you turned a walk around the block into a rehearsal without a stage. A turn was taken at the pharmacy, another at the schoolyard, and a final leg brought the walker back to the tram stop, as if nothing special had happened. A purchase of matches at the kiosk made the pause look right, and a glance into the glass at a display of postcards gave a reason to stand still. A man with a newspaper sat on a bench by the path, and on such days he was just a man and not a figure in a story. Times were written down later at the table, and the names of corners were kept in a head that had room for such things, because it did not try to hold everything at once. Routes were varied enough to copy what others did when they wanted bread, or a stamp, or a bit of news from a friend across the square. A comrade from the office agreed to pass by without speaking, only to test if a nod could be seen from a distance without drawing eyes. Pace was kept even, never slow enough to seem unsure, never quick enough to look hunted. When the shoes met the pavement in a row of steady steps, the click of the heels kept time and gave a count that needed no watch. At the end of the loop, the tram came and went, and the day folded back on itself. It felt like practice done right. Home life in the block gave cover that no file could write, and it asked for nothing but sincerity in return. The woman from the third floor traded jokes at the stairwell and saved glass jars for anyone who might need them, and the pensioner across the hall loaned a hammer that had seen better days. You stood in lines when lines were there, and small talk passed the minutes in ways that kept the face familiar. There was always a chance to fix a chair or to mend a pocket, and such chores helped everyone and cost nothing. Meals were simple and shared without ceremony. A slice of bread given here, a handful of salt offered there, the give and take of a building that held many lives. The communal stove on the landing came on and then settled, and a pot left under a watchful eye did not need a second glance until the hour was up. When you lifted the lid, the smell of cabbage soup rose into the corridor and proved that patience had a reward. Cards were played on Friday nights across a small table with nicked edges, and nothing bigger than small coins ever changed hands. Laughter came easy when someone told the army story again, and it sat well with the serious talk that followed about school or prices. Life in the building formed a net under the feet, and that net took the weight of the secret work without knowing it was there. It felt like the right place to build trust. Chapter 3: Testing the Tale. It was a day chosen for plainness, with work faces and the usual foot traffic, and the plan started with a simple walk. The first leg of the triangle ran from the tram stop to the corner bakery, then along the front of a state shop, and on toward a wide boulevard that offered long lines and clean angles. Steps were counted in an easy way, never rushed and never slow, the pace anyone used when errands did not press. The order had been clear in earlier talks: 3 turns to test the street, a pause to see who paused, and a repeat to wash out accident from intent. Each crosswalk was taken on the light, each glance set in the glass of a shop window, as if it were nothing more than a check of a tie. The rattle of the tram carried along the road and set a steady beat that was easy to match. A person who wished to hide could hide in such noise, and a person who wished to find could use it as a metronome. The first right turn came at a flower stall, and then came a straight stretch with no need to look back. The day had the weight of habit, which kept all things smooth. It helped to remember that the city liked routine, and that a walk done in the open felt safer when it looked like every other walk. The second leg veered left into a shorter street, lined with doors that led to stairwells, each door scuffed by years of hands and boots. Window glass gave back a thin view, enough to show a figure 2 half-lengths behind, then gone, then back again after the next doorway. A cap brim here, a coat hem there. Never more than that, never enough to be sure. A scarf was adjusted at the turn. A hand smoothed the front of the wool coat, and the steps rolled on over plain pavement. A break at a public notice board made a small delay, meant to see who else would slow. The notes there were dull and clear, little notices about vouchers and hours, nothing that anyone would read with care. The scratch of the scarf at the neck set a small anchor in the body and kept the breath steady. A man with a satchel came up behind and passed, and the cap brim did not rise in the glass again. It was good to let time do its work, because a too quick test was never a fair test. The second corner led back toward a busier square, and the plan held firm for the next move. A kiosk sat ahead, the kind that never shut, and it offered a place to stall without false show. A paper was asked for and paid for. The clerk folded it twice with a lazy hand that told of longer days than this one. The paper was tucked under the arm in the same way it had been tucked before on other days when nothing had been sought. 1 more coin was set down for a box of matches, because a repeat sale was the polite way to stand still a little longer. The smell of tobacco drifted from inside the kiosk, sweet and heavy, and it floated out through the small window with the change. A glance in a small tin mirror by the stamps showed only a thick coat and a wool hat behind. Then the shape turned toward the tram line, like any person who lived by the clock. A street sweeper moved past pushing a cart, bristles on the brush worn thin, and the sweeper did not look up. The sidewalk held a woman in felt boots, speaking softly to a child, and there was no echo of the cap brim this time. A small nod was given to the clerk, which the clerk did not return because the clerk did not need to. With the paper tucked under the arm, the delay had been earned in a quiet way, and patience still sat well on the plan. The next piece was the double back, done as if a pocket had been left behind, a step away from the kiosk, then a half turn into the flow from the other side. Not sharp and not blunt, just the change that came when a thought shifted and a person remembered a small task undone. The path led past the same window frames and past the same doorways, but in the opposite way, and the trick was to keep the shoulders soft and the eyes as steady as if looking at nothing in particular. The gaze rode low at the line of the curb, where the rough edge kept feet honest and set the place for the next corner. At the far end, a new set of faces came forward, none of them eager for anything but a warm room and a plate of something plain. The yellow wash of a streetlight reached onto slick patches in the road and set a thin shine that showed who moved and who stood still. That light made simple shadows that did not hide anyone, and it put the world in clear, thin lines. No step drew close and stayed close, and the small clock inside the head said the wind-up on the test had gone as well as it could. It was enough to make a neat turn back to the larger street and keep the line of the plan true. The triangle reached its last point near a tram stop where a guardrail ran along a small park, and the timing had been set on the map days before. The tram line offered a rhythm, and the watch on the wrist had held the count through the turns and pauses. An old man at the bench flicked ashes and watched pigeons, which meant the small square around him stayed dull and helpful. A lozenge in the pocket was moved to the mouth, and its mint taste spread slow and clean across the tongue and settled the breath in a small way. A shop window gave a last check of the coat and hat, and the fold of the paper was set to make the next part easy. A lamppost stood out as a mark, and it would be reached on the bell of the next tram, and the bell would hide a word that did not even need to be spoken. The coat was brushed of a left-behind crumb, the small kind of motion that fit the place and the hour. The steps matched the expected beat, and the plan felt like a set of rails that needed only to be followed. As the bell neared, the thought settled that nothing more dramatic than a walk and a handshake would be needed. He came from the opposite side, a man with a firm step and a face known only from quick glances in quieter rooms. Oleg Penkovsky moved with the steady look of a person who always knew where he was going, and his hand met the free hand in a short grip that would not draw a look. The paper under the arm was shifted, and the tight fold inside it slid into a palm where a ring gave a point to hold. No words passed. The moment did not need them any more than a postman needed a speech when he set a letter down. The dry edge of the hidden note pressed against the skin for a second, a small scrape like a grain of sand that made the transfer clear. The hands dropped and the steps parted, and two people seemed to the world like two strangers who had mind and time for nothing but their own errands. Penkovsky's coat moved away toward the park, and the other coat moved toward the tram, and the distance grew with no change in pace. There were faces at the stop, none of them familiar, and none of them aimed in any special direction. The quiet of a finished task spread out in a modest way, which was exactly what safety needed in that hour. The tram rolled up and the bell struck once and then twice, and doors opened with a sigh that spoke of springs and habit. A foot rose, and then did not, because the next beat required a different path, and so the foot dropped back, and the route took the sidewalk again. The watch hands climbed to the next mark, and the seat inside the tram could have been taken, but leaving it empty made more sense when it came to leaving lines blurred. A small fold of the coat cuff got a pull, and a button was checked, and a gap opened by the ticket booth and gave room to pass a cluster of tired shoppers. The bell sounded again as the tram took on people and then moved away, and the metal note covered the sound of the step that turned down a different street. The ring finger rubbed once across the palm, and the small scrap of memory that was the pressed edge of the note was gone. There was nothing now but a coat that hid a hand, and a hand that had nothing to hide. The movement had the look of a person falling back into the day's run, which always brought risk back down to size. There was one more check to be done, because checks stacked quiet strength behind a cover. A trash bin sat by a bench near a public phone, and a bit of string from a pocket was dropped in, just to give a reason to pause if anyone cared to watch. A boot heel tapped a small rock free of the tread in a way that did not hurry or lag, and the eyes rested on a blank wall across the lane. A truck rolled past and left a thin space in its wake that made footfalls easy to count, and none came that did not belong to their owners. The smell of diesel slid across the curb as the truck changed gear, and it hung for a moment and then drifted away toward the corner like a light cloud. The rhythm of the walk settled into the same roll as before the meeting, with a list of dull chores ready to be brought forward at a word or a glance. A street name was read as if looking for the right place to turn in at a friend's building, and then the next street name was read and the turn came only on the second one. It felt right to let the city do its work of thinning, and right to let the plan breathe in that thinning. Chapter 4. A Brush in Gorky Park. It had been a tense October in 1962, when every doorway talk and every tram seat seemed to lean toward the same subject, and radios in shops said the names Nikita Khrushchev and John F. Kennedy as if they were neighbors who had a loud argument across a fence. The schedule had been set the night before in quiet ink, a place and a minute inside Gorky Park, a place that did not draw a second look in the afternoon. The packet was thin and wrapped flat, tucked under a glove so that it sat like a folded ticket against the palm. A comrade had stood in a doorway and reminded that a two-man tale might trade places, that one would race ahead and the other would lag, and that patience would be the only way through. It was not a time for bravery in any grand sense, only steady hands and simple steps. The plan called for a slow path under the trees, a bend by the pond, and a newspaper that would arrive from the other side at the exact minute. Your part was to be one more person in a cold season coat, keeping pace with other lives. The risk had a shape, and it could be lined up, one quiet move after another. In that way, the day felt manageable enough, and it could be kept that way if everything stayed plain. The only sound that mattered at the start was the dry hiss of radio static, which said to walk as if nothing in the world had changed. The tram ride to the park had been uneventful as far as a ledger would mark it, yet the eyes kept to the glass and the hands to the rail, spaced from others by the ordinary curve of a shoulder. The street rolled past in slow order, a market stall here, a woman with a net bag there, and the loop of overhead lines stretching away like thin branches. Two men boarded at different stops and never seemed to look at each other, yet they were tied by a rhythm that felt familiar from practice, one hopping off to trot ahead, the other lingering, then both showing up again at the next corner. You stood with an easy bend in the knees and let the city carry you, making small choices a person would make, such as shifting closer to the door one stop early. A window gave a slice of the park gates, and shoes touched pavement at a casual angle, like a regular evening walk. The men came off too, calm and neat. None of it had drama, that was the point, and it kept the heart from racing in a way others might notice. The cold metal pole beneath the glove had been smooth and ordinary, and it steadied the mind with something that was simple enough to trust. The south gate of Gorky Park had stood wide, and the paths divided soon after the arch, some curving toward the pond and others up along the rides that were quiet in that season. A vendor cart by the kiosk had a small line, and a mother fussed with a scarf on a child, while a man finished a cigarette by the fence. The chosen route went near a bench with flaking paint, beyond a statue where the path narrowed around a stand of trees. A newspaper had to meet a glove near the bend and keep moving briskly. No pause, only a brush and a turn. Two watchers moved like street lamps in a slow flicker, one ahead and one behind, and they were not ghosts, only men who did a job with the same plain care. The trick, as shared in training rooms far away, had always been to look like a person who cared only about a dinner hour and a place to sit. You took a measured turn at the pond rail and counted 3 lazy steps before angling toward the bench. Between steps, the mind held to regular things, like stocking the pantry and washing a shirt. The smell of roasted sunflower seeds from the kiosk sat in the air and made the scene feel like an ordinary late day, which was the simple comfort the moment required. The pass had been set for 1 minute past the half hour, when many would be crossing the park on their way home, and a paper seller near the gate would be closing his stack with a length of twine. A man with a folded newspaper under his arm came up the path at a steady pace, a hat brim turned down just so, neither shy nor bold. You came along the other side of the narrow path, eyes on the pond, steps even, hands down and unhurried. At the bend, there was a brush of sleeves, as if 2 strangers had misjudged the width of the path, and the gloved hand slid along the fold of the paper, and a slim packet moved into the crease without a tremble. A 2-man tail crossed each other again on the far side of the trees, one glancing at his watch, the other pretending to read signage, both working a pattern that had been seen before. The newspaper man did not break stride, and neither did the person who had brought the packet. The path itself absorbed what had happened and returned to the regular rhythm of walkers. Breath stayed even, not forced, and took in the sharp smell of ink from the fresh sheets, which gave a simple anchor to hold while the pass disappeared into normal life. After the pass, the route had turned up toward the old skating rink, where a few early skaters tested the ice with careful strokes, and laughter popped up now and then and settled down again. The watchers kept to their pattern, easing ahead, then hanging back, maybe out of habit, maybe to be thorough, while the feet in your shoes kept a mild, uneven beat, as if they had no reason to move any other way. A bench became a place to tie and retie a shoe, and a sleeve became something to brush clean, as if a leaf had stuck. A boy waved a stick near the boards, and a couple stood close at the rail, and it was easy to stand there too, to let minutes fill themselves, and make the street feel slow. The man with the newspaper melted into a path toward the tram, where many faces blended together, and he became one more back in a coat among many backs in coats. Steps were counted in mind and tied to signs, lampposts, and corners, the old way of keeping time without a watch. The sound of skate blades scraping thin lines on ice went smooth and steady past the ear, and that gentle scrape felt like a small drum that told the feet to keep to the same calm march. The exit from the park had gone by the side gate, where a bus stop stood under a leaning tree, and a row of people looked up the road now and then, as if they might speed a bus with a stare. A bus came, and the group folded in, and the door took a few at a time, each stepping up and moving down the aisle with the same small patience everyone learns. You stepped on in the middle of the line and moved 2 places back from the door, a spot that made it easy to step off fast if needed. One watcher got on and found a place by the window, and the other stayed on the sidewalk, then walked to the next stop, still trading distance the way fishermen trade the lead along a river. At the next stop, a step down took you into the open again, and the bus rolled away like a wall sliding aside, and the street became simple to move through. A turn into a small lane led to a short cut behind a repair shop, and a left after that returned to the main road without fuss. The smell of diesel exhaust from the bus hung in the cool air for a bit, and it marked the edge of the move away as clearly as a line on a map, which made the pace feel settled. Back at the office, the trade desk had waited with its stack of routine notes, stamped forms, and a ledger that always needed one more neat entry. A clerk had asked if a delivery had arrived from a mill, and a pencil marked a date as if that were the most important task of the day. A tin kettle clicked and snapped on the small stove, and someone muttered about whether the Americans would climb further up or climb down, and someone else shook his head and said Khrushchev would know the line. Kennedy's name came and went as a rumor of a blockade, yet the room still worked at the same pace, checking numbers, confirming shipments, nodding at remarks that did not need answers, held the coat on the peg longer than usual, and then moved it to the chair back when it became natural to do so. There was nothing brave about the hands that signed forms and handed carbon copies across the desk to a comrade who had his own pile. There was only work as there had been the day before. The dry heat from the sputtering radiator on the wall touched the back of the hand for a moment, and it felt steady and plain, which helped the mind settle into the evening with simple ease. Evening took the city in its usual way, with lights coming on one room after another, and curtains drawn in the careful habits of a place that valued order. At home, the hallway creaked once, and then fell quiet, and the table became a work area for small notes in a plain hand that would be put away before anyone came by. A radio gave short reports in careful words, and the voices stayed calm even when the facts did not invite calm, and that was as much theater as truth. Some said ships had turned, some said more ships were coming, and someone joked weakly about the price of fish, and it turned into a short chuckle that helped the air in the room. A plan for the next day was simple: arrive early, leave at a regular time, and keep a steady face. The brush in the park had felt like a stone moved from one pocket to another, small but necessary, and it had not asked for a story, only for a straight back. A kettle boiled, and a cup was filled, and a notebook went into a drawer that closed without a squeak. The taste of weak tea set the tongue in a familiar way, and it made the room feel like a safe place to sit and breathe. Chapter 5. North to Leningrad. The ticket window had closed for the night train, yet the platform kept its slow order as people drifted toward the cars with small bags and wrapped parcels. Trade papers lay folded in a coat pocket, the edges softened by weeks of handling and careful use. A porter glanced once, then looked past, and a conductor with a cap set just so checked names against a list and moved on without a word. The car held narrow bunks, a metal sink at the end of the corridor, and a small rack for shoes that had seen many seasons. A comrade from the office had given a nod during the day, nothing more, and the quiet of that nod carried well into the dark. A folded shirt formed a pillow, and a coat became a blanket, useful for an honest sleep and for the look of a worker on the move. A samovar sat near the carriage door, and it was easy to stand near it and be part of the normal drift of the night. The ticket had been stamped with a dull chop, and the mind counted the simple steps of a simple trip. There had been no talk in the office worth noting, just prices to check and a report to complete by the end of the week. The cover held steady because the task held steady, and the task looked like trade work. A check of the corridor showed strangers swapping spaces and making ready for sleep. The lamp above the berth gave just enough shape to a page of figures. The clack of the rails set a slow beat that brought calm and kept time with a steady heart. A guard passed once with a soft cough to mark his turn, and then feet were still and the car settled into its long pull north. The bunk had a thin mattress that did the job, and the blanket had a small tear at the edge that caught a finger when moved the wrong way. A book lay open for a few minutes, but the rows of prices meant for next week were more useful to the mind. A man across the aisle snored for a short stretch and then rolled over and found quiet again, which felt polite in the night. The conductor knocked, pulled the door back a span, checked the ticket, and slid the door closed with care, like a man used to long travel and short talks. A comrade in the next compartment told a story about a cousin in a mill who counted bolts by hand and never lost track, and the story filled the space between stops. A student in the corner seat spoke of a lecture about grain, which sounded heavy for the hour, and then he drifted off. The figures on the page did not look like much, but they matched a rhythm learned across years, and that rhythm kept thoughts tidy. In the dark outside, fences and sheds came and went as marks on a line. There was no rush to the journey, and no need for extra steps. The tea poured from the samovar held its heat, and the glass felt warm in the hand. The car rolled into Leningrad well before the day, and a slow line formed under the station clock while people gathered themselves. The hall stretched wide and plain, with bare walls and big letters that told arrivals and departures, and faces had that early look of duty before speech had fully started. A woman in a scarf stood with a cane and a bag of apples, waiting for a son, and a soldier in a worn coat waited alone, not in a hurry to be looked at. The hotel clerk in a side office took the passport and the slip from the trade office, copied a name, stamped a line, and slid the papers back with a short nod. The address of the guest house had been marked in pencil on a folded map, and the tram out front showed the number needed without fuss. The room had a bed pushed to the window and a sink with a tap that needed a firm hand. The coat went on the chair back to keep its shape, and a pencil and small book went into the inside pocket as part of the routine. A check of the street from the stairwell window showed a few early workers, nothing more, and the view settled the mind. A thick slice of bread from a stand on the corner made a simple breakfast without talk or ceremony. The smell of fresh rye from the kiosk eased the first hour in a gentle way that made the day feel simple. The gatehouse at the shipyard sat low and square, with a guard who looked through glass and did not look twice after the pass was shown. The list of parts and prices came out of the pocket and looked like a worker's task, which it was, line by line and number by number. The cranes along the water stood tall and stiff, and they moved with slow care as the yard woke and a whistle somewhere marked the start of a shift. A clerk led the way down a strip of boards between puddles and pointed out a warehouse where spares were kept and checked. A foreman spoke in short phrases about supply, grumbled about delays, and then showed a smile that did not last long but was real enough. In a side office, a young man mentioned the radio from the night before, how Andrei Gromyko had spoken for the country, as if reading from a ledger, and made it sound like calm was not far off. The name sat in the air like something solid, and the clerk nodded as if that was good for the day. The papers were set on a crate, and figures were marked in small, careful script that fit the job. The yard worked as yards do, one crane after another, one worker after another, all part of a simple movement that could be counted. The shine of oil on the water near the pier caught the eye, and then let it go, and the work went on in an easy way. A corner desk in a small office held a ledger, a metal pen cup, and a calendar with a month already half done. The chair tilted if one leaned too far, and the window stuck unless lifted by both hands at once. Columns of figures took shape in a clean hand, and the price marks looked like marks any trade clerk would make after a quick walk through the floor. A young woman with a scarf at her neck brought bread and spoke of a cousin who wanted work in the yard and would take any hours offered. The bread was shared without fuss, and a second piece was folded into a pocket for later on. A comrade from accounts came by mid-morning and asked after the trip, and the answers held nothing a stranger could not say. The desk phone rang twice and stopped, a small habit in the building to show someone was ready to talk in person. In the ledger, a line of valves matched a line of crates seen near the wall, and the match itself felt steady. The desk smelled faintly of paste, but that was a guess from an old stain on the wood that did not matter. The price sheet now looked complete enough for a report that would pass a quick check by anyone outside. The taste of black tea kept the tongue busy and made the numbers feel honest without asking for anything more. After noon, a walk along the canal gave a good reason to move and a clear view of shop windows for checking reflections. The route turned at a corner bookstore, and then again near a tram stop, letting the street do the work of timing. A bundle of papers went into a work bag and stayed there, and a small letter with a simple note to the office in Moscow went into a post box with a firm and measured push. The bag hung from the shoulder, heavy enough to look right and light enough to carry for the rest of the day. A man with an overcoat and hat stood by the bridge rail for a while, and then left. He did not look twice at anyone, and no one looked twice at him. A couple argued softly over what to make for supper, then crossed the street, and the sound of their steps faded into the regular noise of the city. A shop girl lacquered a sign at her door, working in slow strokes, focused on the line she held. A tram clanged into view, filled and rolled on, and the space it left felt natural and not worth a pause. The bag went higher on the shoulder, and the path returned toward the yard by a different street. The cold air on the cheeks woke the skin and brought a clean edge to the walk that settled the thoughts in a neat row. The second day brought the warehouse itself, where a clerk kept a clipboard and a pencil worn flat at the end. He spoke of delivery dates with care and showed a line of crates that matched a shipment list, and the list looked like work that had taken most of his morning. A foreman waved over a handcart, and the visit turned into an extra set of hands for 10 minutes of plain help. The cart's wheels stuck at a crack in the floorboards, and a pry bar opened the way with a groan that passed quickly back into normal sound. A question about spare bolts led to a shelf that stood too high until a ladder arrived and made it simple. A mention of the radio came again, with a remark that Gromiko's words sounded steady when steady was wanted most, and the remark did what it needed to do. The ledger lines grew truer as the room itself gave a shape to the numbers, and the numbers matched the cover and the purpose both. A lunch of bread and a thin slice of sausage was shared near the doorway, where the breeze turned the paper on the clipboard. A glove was pulled tight across the palm to keep the grip sure on the wood. The crate they moved had a clear label that matched the list and let the work end on a straight note. The weight of the crate strained the shoulders enough to feel useful, and left a small ache that felt like honest labor done well. Evening returned at the guest house with a small kitchen that had 2 burners and a window that looked down on a courtyard. A woman from another floor boiled potatoes and told a joke about a neighbor who saved string and never used it, then laughed in a quiet way that brought others near. The table held a jar of pickles, a plate of bread, and a tin of salt that came out for any who needed it. A comrade from earlier in the day stopped by with a newspaper and spoke of wages and a cousin who was moving to a new plant. The paper had a picture of Nikita Khrushchev smiling at a factory, a picture from some months ago but still useful for talk, and it sat on the table until someone took it away. A notebook in a coat pocket held neat lines about prices and parts that could become a clean report with a careful rewrite. The pen moved in small strokes that did not draw attention and left no stains on the sleeves. The day's path in Leningrad felt straight, with steps that matched the cover and no extra turns. The hour moved towards sleep as the kettle cooled. The low hum of the radio on a shelf filled the slow time and gave the room a steady sound that felt safe enough. Chapter 6. Chalk and Brick. Moscow again. Moscow had taken you back the way a city takes back a worker after a trip, with the same doors, the same tram bells, the same office keys resting in a desk drawer. Papers were stacked and signed, phone calls were returned, and a quiet line about prices and quotas was kept ready in case anyone asked how the work went in Leningrad. In the halls, talk ran shorter than before, and faces watched rather than chatted, as if the air itself had been told to keep still. The radio in the break room carried a stiff voice about order and vigilance, and the name Yuri Andropov slid through the words like a weight placed on a table. It was not the speech that mattered so much as the way men looked at the door while it played. A comrade at the far desk kept his eyes on his ledger and did not ask friendly questions. The route home was taken with steady steps, and the building entry was kept to a natural pace, not slow, not fast. The plan sat where it had sat for weeks, a dead drop near a trolley stop where the wall had a known weakness. It was simple and small, and it was needed. The day's duties were tended like plants that could not show neglect. The tick of the wall clock in the office marked each minute in a dry, even beat, and that sound made the hours feel easy to count and easier to hold. The choice of spot had been careful. The trolley stop lay along a street where trucks turned in from a warehouse road and where an old wall held its shape but gave a little under the hand. That wall would take a loose brick and keep it, and a chalk mark could be made quick and light without calling eyes. Cars were counted over 4 days, and the numbers made a pattern. At dawn, 3 stood along the far curb. At noon, no space was open. Near dusk, Two old sedans favored the corner. People at the stop looked down at the tracks or up at the sky, and no one studied the bricks. A woman who swept the pavement took pride in her work and moved on a steady loop, and her schedule helped set the hour. The idea was not to be bold, but to be plain. A bag with bread and a folded paper would be carried. The package would be small and wrapped in a sleeve that matched the dust of the wall. A step too quick would be worse than one too slow, and so the plan asked for a normal pace. Overhead, the faint hiss of the trolley wires came and went, a soft reminder that the city's lines were always alive. The working tools were simple enough to explain if a drawer were opened. A small stick of white chalk sat in a tin, and a handkerchief rested beside it. The chalk had already left marks on the cloth, but that only made it look like the cloth had a common job. The package itself held a few thin pages and a strip with short numbers, each page folded twice with steady fingers. The sleeve was trimmed from a brown bag so it would not crinkle much. A pocket was chosen, in a jacket that had seen enough winters to look unremarkable. Timing, as always, mattered more than anything that could be put in a pocket. The path would go past a kiosk, cross at a light, loop near a schoolyard, and arrive at the stop without fuss. A comrade from the office would walk the other side of the street and then vanish at the second corner, not a shadow but a piece of weather. Before the jacket was buttoned, chalk touched skin, and a small line was tested behind a book on the shelf. The grit of chalk on your thumb felt like sand on old wood, and that little scrape gave a clear, steady sense of what work lay ahead. The walk began under a grey sky that did not promise rain and did not deny it either. Steps fell in a rhythm that matched the flow of the street, and nothing in the hands or shoulders broke that line. A man who sold cigarettes nodded and then looked past, the way men do when they see the same faces every day. The kiosk held a line, and a pause there gave the right delay without drawing notice. A school bell rang once and stopped, and a moment by the iron fence gave the turn at the next corner a natural shape. A police van rolled across the far end of the block and kept going, and that sort of passing was part of the city, and not a sign of anything else. Across the way, the comrade's coat flashed once and then was gone, which was how it should be. A bend in the path took the steps behind a row of garages, and then back out into the open. The street opened to the trolley stop, and the wall ran along it like a quiet line. The smell of exhaust gathered at the curb where buses idled, thin and sharp, and it reminded the mind to keep the breath steady and the pace even. The wall's face was the same as it had been when first touched weeks before, and the loose brick sat 2 rows up from the end where mortar had chipped. The hand reached up, lingered a fraction too long to be natural, and was then withdrawn as if brushing dust. A second pass, covered by a look down the line for the trolley, let fingers hook the brick and pull it into the palm. The space behind was shallow, but it took the small package without trouble, and the folded sleeve slid into place as if stacked there by a mason. The brick returned with a press and a small rocking motion to seat it level, and the pressure was kept gentle, so no mortar flaked. A folded paper in the other hand gave cover for a quick mark. The chalk touched the edge where brick met brick and made a short tick, no more than half a finger long. The chalk was wiped on the handkerchief, and the cloth went back into the pocket in one motion. A militiaman crossed the street at the far end and did not turn his head. A child asked her mother about the time and was told to wait. The rough edge of the brick had scraped the fingertips a little, and that dry scrape left a firm memory that kept the mind calm. A drop, no matter how well set, liked to be wrapped in normal life, so the steps took the path past the bakery and into the queue. The counterwoman knew faces and did not use names, and a loaf was exchanged for notes without small talk. The bag felt heavier now, but that was only in the head. At the corner, a man selling sunflower seeds whistled a tune, and someone laughed, and it all seemed to belong to a day that had no secret at all. At the office after lunch, the same columns were filled with the same figures, and the same stamp clacked down on the forms. The posts on the street carried fresh posters about work goals and order, and the faces in those pictures did not look back. A phone call about freight rates was made and a letter was typed, and when a question came about the Leningrad visit, the answer was plain. If asked, the evening would hold a visit with a neighbor to check a loose hinge, and that was the sort of plan that made sense to anyone. The smell of warm bread in the bag rose a little under the desk, and that simple smell sat there like a reminder to keep things steady and plain. The hours that followed asked for patience rather than nerve. A sweep, when it came, often began in the small way, with a change in who stood near a shop or who watched from a doorway. Evening brought a bus ride 2 stops past the usual exit, then a walk back along a different row of lights. A sedan idled near a curb, and 2 men sat low in their seats, but the car did not move when the bus hissed and eased away. The trick was to let the city hold its own traffic, and not to make patterns that someone eager could trace. A poster with a stern slogan hung on a wall near a factory gate, and the words about vigilance might have been for workers or for anyone else who needed to read them. A woman with a scarf let a child tug her along, and there was nothing in that slow pull that looked staged. The second bus home arrived, and a place was taken near the back door, and the fare was placed in the box like always. The cold of the metal rail under the glove steadied the hand, a firm chill that kept thoughts from running and kept the line of the body relaxed. The next morning, the route passed by the drop without a glance at the wall, and then turned at the light to take the long loop around the block. A man with a briefcase had stopped by the stop, tied his shoe, and moved on, and that small act was not new in any city. A woman in a blue coat waited alone, looked once at a watch, and then caught the trolley that came on the minute. The pieces of life that could be signs did not become signs until someone forced them so, and the job was to let them be what they were. A cafe near the corner served tea in glasses with metal holders, and a minute at a table let the window give a view of the street. A caretaker from a nearby building scraped ice from a stair with a dull blade and took his time doing it. The chalk mark was still there when the view was right, and the brick line looked even. A courier might come at noon or at dusk, and no eyes should recognize him or remember him after he left. The thin whistle of wind along the wall drifted across the street when a gust found the corner, and that small sound gave a clear measure to the waiting. Chapter 7. Ring Road Run. The car had waited in the narrow yard behind the trade office, paint dull under a film of dust, plates marked for diplomacy, and kept clean for the patrols that liked things in order. A driver sat with hands easy on the wheel, a companion in the seat behind with a folded brief. Posters of Leonid Brezhnev were up again along the boulevard, smiling over wheat and machines, and the faces on the street looked past them with the usual tired calm of a workday. The plan for the day was simple and useful. A run around the ring road would test the spaces behind and beside. A second car would go with the first to make numbers look ordinary. A third would fall away at the right ramp to cut any hangers on. It was routine by then, set for certain days, after certain meetings, and never exactly the same. You nodded once to the driver, and the gate swung open at a steady pace. The sedan rolled out, kept a mild speed, and joined the flow toward the outer city, where wide lanes helped small plans look like errands. The smell of gasoline drifted through the vents as the engine warmed, and it felt like the start of a simple task that asked for a quiet head. The convoy gathered with no show. A plain car took the lead by 2 lengths, and another slipped behind with room to breathe. The middle car kept to its place as if held there by a thin line, never crowding, never lagging, and the mirrors showed what counted in brief glances. Traffic police watched from a booth and gave no sign. A bus pulled out with a puff of grey and settled ahead of them, and the driver eased the speed to keep the shape of the group. Each lane change took no more than a lazy swing of the arm, and each turn signal came on and went off in time. Fingers stayed off any clock, and no one moved in a rush. It felt like a slow walk down a familiar street where every step had been made before, and the steady hum of the engine filled the quiet inside the car while the plan held its shape. The outer lanes spread wider near the ramps that led to the ring road, and signs gave way to long bends and flat bridges with a view of cranes and flats. A kiosk on the corner had new papers, and the headline from the week still came to mind. A note about talks in Vienna and the patience of Henry Kissinger, as if patience was a public word. All of it fit the season under Brezhnev, when the words were steady and the work was careful and slow. The driver took the inner lane where the gaps were clean, let a truck pass with a gentle wave, and counted cars between them and the ramp. There was a hand to the visor, not for show, but to hide one look at a face in a boxy sedan, 2 cars back. The bridge ahead made a clean arc, and the run would begin in full once they were on the long loop that circled the city. The glare off the windshield at the top of the ramp made the world plain and white for a moment, and then the view leveled out as the car found its line and settled. The ring road made a wide circle past fields, factories, and long walls of brick, and the pace there always told the truth. Trucks kept to the right with a calm sway, and buses hogged the middle when stops were thin. The lead car held a steady 40, not fast enough to mark, not slow enough to invite a pass. The space between the cars looked like a habit, not an order. A black Volga came and went in the mirror, then fell behind a bus, and another small sedan took its place for a time. At each point where lanes peeled off, the driver checked the mirror, checked the window, and looked forward again, each move clean and the same. A paper map lay on the console, with a corner folded to show the exits that mattered. A slow truck with timber could hide a change, and the driver let it ease ahead until it formed a large, simple curtain. The rumble of tires on the joined slabs of the road beat a steady rhythm under their feet, and the tempo kept the talk quiet, and the plan calm. The decoy car took the first move at a marked exit near a set of warehouses, a place they had not used in weeks. The indicator flashed a modest warning, and the lead car gave a small brake so the gap would look routine. The middle car held course and kept the lane, and the third car, the one that mattered less, slid off in a clean arc down the ramp. No one turned ahead. A dark sedan 2 lengths back shifted lanes as if to follow, then drifted back behind a small truck, as if a thought had come and gone. The driver kept the line straight and the speed even. A trolley sign went by, and a billboard for a holiday showed flowers in full pane, a cheerful lie for the long strip of grey that ran ahead. A slow breath made time feel simple. The soft click of the turn signal in the lead car as it returned to the lane came faint through the air, and with that small tick and a straight wheel, the split had been made without fuss, and the road felt wider again. The main car stayed on the ring for another exit, then slipped onto a service road that ran near a string of low factories. The lead stayed put as a marker, and the middle car lagged a half length to watch the merge behind. If the black Volga, or one like it, had chosen the decoy, there would be quiet space now. If not, then a shape would nag the mirror near every bend. They took an underpass and came up slow to a feeder lane. A traffic policeman leaned on a rail and watched the road and nothing else. A brickyard rolled by, and a stray dog trotted along the verge. All of it looked as it should. The driver suggested a short loop, one more bend to be sure, and you nodded without hurry. A small draft came in through the window seam as the car turned along a side lane, and that light touch of air felt like a check mark next to a small task done well. They stopped at a fuel station set back from the road, where a single pump worked, and a man in a cap wiped his hands on a rag that never looked clean. Diplomatic plates drew a glance, and then a careful smile. The driver stepped out, took the hose, and watched the numbers creep. He spoke about traffic like a neighbor. The lead car idled by the curb, and the attendant wiped the glass in slow strokes that left more streaks than before. A sack of bread sat on the back seat, left as part of the shape of a normal day, and it would go back to the office kitchen later without a word. Coins and a small note changed hands. A lorry eased in behind them and waited without a horn. A small boy looked at the plates and then at the faces and lost interest. The metal cap of the tank felt cold and smooth when it turned home again, and the clean click told them the stop had ended as simply as it had begun. The return to the ring was plain and silent. The lead car filled the lane with a lazy steadiness, and the middle car moved up a touch to close the space, as if the station had been a short rest and nothing more. The driver chose the second exit after the ramp to avoid making too neat a number, and a long line of trolley wires marked the edge where the city began to draw close again. Warehouses gave way to low flats, and then to taller blocks with balconies full of rugs and laundry. A grey rain cloud looked ready to break, and then passed on. A single motorcycle came fast, and then was gone. The mirror showed cars that mattered not at all, and the watch behind felt less like a strain and more like a habit. A folded report sat under the seat with notes that would be sorted later in a quiet room. A slow clatter from the wires above a passing trolley touched the air as they crossed under, and the sound marked the moment like a gentle bell as the run eased toward its end. Chapter 8: Crowds and Cutouts at the Games. The city had put on its best face for the 1980 games, and every corner showed it. Banners ran along streets that had been patched and swept, and volunteers in neat shirts waved visitors toward new signs. The boycott had taken some of the shine, but crowds still filled trams and sidewalks, and the stadium grounds seemed to breathe like a single large thing. A meet with a cutout had been marked for months, and the date sat tight on a small card in a wallet. The task was simple in words and slow in steps. Walk in, sit, pass a thing, walk out. Extra patrols had been set because the center wished to show order, and that meant watchers on benches and at gates. A companion in the trade office had nodded once the night before and said nothing more. A phrase had been agreed for the signal, a quiet use of the name Andrei Sakharov that would sound like small talk to strangers. There had been no reason to tell more than was needed, and that kept everyone safe. Across the river, the stadium bowl held the day like a cup. The steady roar from Luzniki reached the park in long waves, and the noise felt like a cover that would keep small things small, which helped the mind rest on the plan. The path toward the grounds had been set in 3 stretches to match the clock and the ebb of foot traffic. The first stretch took the metro to Sportivnaya, with a stop 2 stations early, and the second used a slow walk along a row of kiosks. The last stretch angled past a cordon and into a shaded alley of trees that ran toward benches facing the water. Tickets and a folded program sat in a pocket, not near the small envelope sealed inside a different paper. A short detour past a vendor had allowed 2 uniformed men to step ahead and clear a line of people. Hurrying had been avoided because it suggested a need, and need drew eyes. The cutout would be a stranger with a small limp and a plain cap, and the defense against nerves had been routine. A man in a bright tracksuit had handed a child a paper flag and kept walking. In front of the main gate, a cart began to fry dough in hot oil, and the warm smell hung in the air like an easy mask, which made the approach feel simple for a moment. The bench sat near a path where joggers liked to circle in quiet hours, and a clear view had been chosen months back. A sweep of the area showed couples, a pensioner with a cane, and a group of youths trading pins. The bench boards had been marked on a past visit with a small nick beneath the 3rd slat, and that mark still showed when checked from the side. The signal ran like a short play: sit first, set the program down, and speak 5 words that turned gently toward the name. When the figure with the limp arrived, the line was spoken as if it were an old complaint about summer talk. The reply keyed on the last word and fell right where it should, and the stranger took the end of the bench without turning. The small envelope moved inside the program with a careful fold of the cover. A pigeon hopped close and then away at an easy pace. The worn wood pressed under the palm with the smooth feel of old varnish, and that simple touch kept the hands steady as the watch ticked quietly. 2 plainclothes men had set themselves by a trash bin near the path, and their shoes showed the same shine as the gate guards. Their eyes did not sweep fast, which said they had time to spare, and that meant patience mattered more than tricks. The cutout asked about seating near the east side, and spoke as if seeking a better view for a cousin. The plan did not need more talk, so the heads stayed forward, and the words remained few. Once the clock reached the 2nd mark, the stranger stood and left the program behind, and the body stayed relaxed with shoulders loose. A couple took a photo on a small camera, and then a boat eased by out on the water. A banner with the rings also showed the face of Leonid Brezhnev near the gate, and his calm stare above the crowd made the crowd look smaller than it felt. A gust tugged a paper edge and then settled. A single bright flag flashed in the sun like a quiet signal that did not say more than now, which made the timing feel right. The 2nd stage began with feet moving at a slow tourist pace. The program tucked under an arm as if forgotten. A turn at the kiosk, and another near a map board set a short S-shaped path past the same bin. The 2 men by the bin did not rise at first, so the walk continued, and a pause came beside a drink stand to buy a bottle that would give purpose to the stop. A boy laughed and ran past with a paper cap that had the rings stamped in blue. The cutout reappeared 2 benches ahead with a different paper in hand, and glanced once at a watch. The program settled on the new bench without a fuss, and the bottle took the place of the paper without a need to look down. The walk moved on, and the bench stayed in sight from a shallow angle until a group blocked the view. A hand reached back to adjust a cuff and then returned to the bottle. A vendor knocked the tops off 3 glass sodas in a row, and the quick clink of metal on glass sounded even and light, which kept the beat of the steps easy. A light sweep by uniformed militia started near the river path, and tickets were checked with polite faces and firm hands. The papers in the pocket came out in the order practiced, with the trade office letter on top and the event ticket behind it. The man at the cordon glanced at the letterhead and then at the pass photo, and a word about a supplier from Tallinn turned the moment dull. The next checker waved the line forward, and the body stayed in place until it was clear to move. The cutout had vanished from the near benches, which had been expected in the plan. A girl offered pins for sale, and then drifted off when no one spoke. An older woman sat and tied her shoe with a careful knot. A step away from the cordon, a bent ticket stub lay on the ground, and the toe nudged it under a bench leg. The paper edges scratched the thumb with a dry raff, and that small roughness brought the mind back to the simple rule of slow hands and plain gestures. The third stage ran along the stadium's outer ring, where a wall cast shade and a path bent toward a small side gate. A group of visitors in matching hats walked ahead and spoke in low voices that masked other sounds. The cutout had left the program where planned, and the task now was to pass the pickup point without a look and return on a different line. A choice was made to step into a restroom and wash hands, and then to stop at a board that showed the day's events. A man with a newspaper tucked under his belt stood near the board and looked bored enough to be real. The sweep at the bin had shifted, and one of the plainclothes men checked his watch in a way that showed no hurry. The next move reached the bench again, and a tie was tightened as the walk slowed. A program now lay under the bench leg as if it had slid there, and a crouch to retie a lace brought a hand to the gap. The cool metal of the bench support touched the knuckles, and that firm feel steadied the fingers as the small cylinder slipped into the jacket lining without noise. The exit route worked best along the bridge toward the tram stop, so the path turned that way in a mild arc. A family stopped to take a photo, and that pause let another group break the line of sight from the bin. A slow wait at the railing made the time pass, and a look at the river's dull surface gave the face something to face. A bus hissed as it pulled in near the stop, and the gate guards looked the other way as a troop marched past. The small cylinder had been set as a pencil core, and the jacket sat light with nothing else in the pockets. The tram arrived, and the step up felt like any other step. A man stood with a folded ladder, and two women compared seat numbers on their tickets. The crowd closed and opened around each stop. A truck idled by the curb near the stadium gate, and its exhaust pushed a thick diesel smell into the warm air, and that heavy scent made the tram's stale space feel safe and dull. Chapter 9. Quiet reports in a warmer wind. In the mid-80s, the city ran at a slower clip, and the work followed that pace. The new speeches from Mikhail Gorbachev rolled across radios and office talk, and the word glasnost moved from the newspapers to the corner store. Meetings were cut back without complaint. Notes grew shorter because there was less to explain about risk and watchers. The desk at the trade office filled with the same papers as before, but the pressure behind them eased. A guard at a gate cracked a dry joke instead of a stare. A neighbor raised a glass to brighter days and did not lower his voice. The cover life did not change its shape, but its weight lightened, like a coat hung on the back of a chair instead of worn all day. The careful habits stayed in place. Walks were planned, calls were spaced, and messages were set down with steady care. Only the rhythm was kinder. Even the city streets seemed to relax. Buses came and went without the old grind between each line of passengers. It was not a time for new tricks, only for fewer. There was a sense that the pair of hands on the same old tools could rest between turns. Through it all, the day smelled of wet pavement after a thaw, plain and honest, as if the ground itself approved of the small slack that had appeared. Reports were still written, just in a new shape. At the kitchen table, a lined notebook took the place of the stacks that had once filled a drawer. Lines were kept neat, dates were clear, and the tone stayed even. A few sentences carried the matter at hand, and no more. Words like hold and delay did most of the work. Where a long chain of notes had been normal, now a few lines ended a question. The habit of care did not fade. Each name was reduced to a simple mark or a roll, so that nothing extra could be read by eyes that should never see. The clock on the wall kept the same pace it had kept for years, and each hour found its page half full, never crowded. The small stack of finished pages was tucked in the same spot where the spare matches had once sat. The table was quiet, and the soft light through the kitchen window made it easy to see each word without haste. Long walks by the river became the safest way to keep a matter alive without calling it a meeting. A comrade would fall in step near the bridge, and small talk would carry the first blocks. There was no map to draw, no codes to check in a lane, only the street as it passed by, and the sense that everything could be said with time between sentences. When a topic grew near, the words slowed. News of the wider world was folded into simple talk. Andrei Sakharov's return to the city was spoken of in a level voice, not whispered, and that fact told as much as any report. The river moved as it always had, pulling winter rubbish and spring twigs toward the bend. The city watched itself in the water, like someone checking a collar in a small mirror, trying a new look and not sure yet what it meant. Hands rested on the iron railing when it was time to pause, and the cool metal kept both people present. The walk would end as it began, with a nod and a shared sense that care had done its job. At the office, the cover work carried on, steady and plain. Prices were marked, shipments were checked, and small disputes were solved with a letter that kept everyone polite. The chatter around the desks turned toward new plans for the city, and old slogans were set aside. There was less need to fit a message into the middle of a busy day. When it had to be done, a single envelope took the place of several. It could be slipped into a routine errand like paying a bill at the post where no one watched anything because everyone had their own stack to move. The form at the window was filled in with neat writing, the envelope was tucked in with the rest, and nothing about the act stood out. The habit of looking twice down a hall remained. The habit of waiting a day before acting remained too. But a new balance sat over the hour, and it felt honest to take it. The only thing that stood out was the dry edge of paper against the fingers. A clear reminder that small acts were still best done with steady hands. Home life softened in step with the city. On the stairwell, a boy skated a boot along the rail and did not get scolded. The old woman from the second floor tried fresh herbs on her windowsill, and neighbors smiled at her small garden rather than wonder what she hoped to see. Repairs were at last made to the front door, and it closed with one clean push. Even the shop down the street kept its shelves in a better way, and the line moved forward without the old grumble. The cover spoke as it needed to, and the silence held when it should. Every now and then, a story from earlier years was told and then folded away again. It was not the time to teach anyone new skills or ask for new help. It was the time to keep what had been built safe and simple. Heat rose up through the same clanging pipes, and a palm on the radiator found a steady warmth that felt earned, not borrowed. And it seemed right to let it sink in for a minute before moving on to the next small task. There were still careful talks in public places, though they were few and gentle. A tea room near the tram stop made a good cover. The same server worked the same tables, and no one looked twice at two clerks resting with a short break between duties. A phrase about a shipment or a contract carried the first minutes. Then a quick turn to the real point settled on the table like a folded napkin, plain and easy to pick up. Plans were shaped around delay, not action. If the choice was risk or wait, the better path was wait. Codes were left unused if they were not needed. The skills had not gone dull, they were simply kept in their sleeves. The man across the table nodded at that, and agreed to hold fast unless called. No one spoke the word safe. It did not need to be said. The taste of strong tea sat on the tongue as the cup was set down, and the talk closed with a slow breath and a nod toward the door. Evenings found attention on the small set in the corner, where a speech or a factory visit was shown in regular order. The same face who had promised change in the first months kept at it, and the message kept its shape in simple language that most anyone could follow. With each new line, the notes at the table grew shorter still. Only what mattered to the work made it to the page. Stray thoughts were folded into a notebook meant only for private use. Street noise went quiet earlier now, and the apartment took on the steady feel of a place in good working order. A list that once hung inside the cupboard door was taken down because it was no longer needed. A pencil lay beside the notebook, sharp and ready, and was often left untouched for a whole night. It did not feel lazy to let it rest. It felt right. The glow of the television screen gave the room a calm wash, and when the set clicked off, the peace held. On some nights, a light rain drew another walk, not for work, not for cover, only to count the years and see what remained. The streets were familiar, down to the crooked sign and the patched bit of sidewalk near the bakery. A comrade, sometimes joined, sometimes not. The route did not matter. There was little to dodge now, and there was no pride taken in that ease. It was met with care, the same care that had kept the hands steady when things were hard. Windows showed small parties, a guitar here, a card game there. A few people planned trips they would not have said aloud before. Change had a way of looking ordinary when it was real. The walks ended at the same corner, where the old trolley pole had once sparked more than it should. A short pause marked the end of the night, and the step toward home came without a word. The rain made a soft patter on the cap as the last block was taken, and the mind stayed clear and quiet all the way to the door. Chapter 10. Packing the legend away. The day the flag came down had been quiet in the flat. A small television sat on the table, its picture steady, while the voice spoke of transfer and an end no one had expected to see so soon. The red banner over the Kremlin was lowered, and the camera found Boris Yeltsin while he stood for a new order that would take some time to understand. The streets beyond the window moved at their usual pace, people wrapped in coats, carrying bags, checking watches, because even endings asked for bread and plans. A comrade sat in a chair saying little, the two of you keeping the sound low so the neighbors could keep their own thoughts. There had been a long stretch of years behind that moment, task by task, curb by curb, each step meant to look like a simple errand on a grey day. The picture did not show much feeling on any face, which matched the steady way the work had been done and the even breath kept during harder weeks. A draft slipped under the old window frame and touched the ankles, a small reminder of winter even when the room was warm. When the broadcast ended, the set was switched off, and both sat without speaking for a while, letting the change settle like dust after a door closed. The city looked the same from the glass, though the line of time had shifted. After a moment, the chair scraped back, and the small room returned to work, as it always had. Closing out the life that had guarded the work took patience more than anything else. The table was cleared, and a folder came open where the pages had been kept, numbers and phrases that had never been shared with anyone who did not need to know. Lines were crossed, names were checked off, and thin slips were fed to a dish in the sink where a match had been set earlier. It had not been done in haste. Each piece was read one last time, then held to the calm flame until the edges curled and darkened. The ash broke under a spoon, and the flow of grey powder went down with a kettle's pour. On the screen a few hours before, Mikhail Gorbachev had spoken in his careful way, and that had felt like a door opening for good, which told the hands how to move now. It was not triumph and not grief, only a slow taking apart of a house that had stood long enough. The dry rustle of old paper as it slid against the next sheet filled the pause between steps, the sound steady and small. A companion stood by the window and watched the yard while the pages were finished, calling out the time now and then. When the last card went dark at the rim and fell in on itself, the dish was wiped and the metal smelled clean. It had been enough, and that was the point. Neighbors still came by with simple needs, and that felt like the right way to end things. A knock at the door brought the man from the floor below, the one who worried over prices and replacements and whether the new stamps would mean different bread. He offered a packet of black tea as a thanks for small favors exchanged over the years. A bulb turned, a parcel signed, a ride given once when his boy was late to an exam. The kettle went on, and the two sat shoulder to shoulder at the small table, talking about the corner shop, and the way the cashier now smiled more when the line was long. The talk never reached what had sat in the drawer. That was good manners, and also safety, even at the end. Steam rose from the cups, and the weak tea carried a thin, familiar bitterness on the tongue that had marked many long nights. The man fiddled with his hat and told a joke about a new office changing its sign twice in a week, and a laugh came easy, like a relief valve letting out a puff. When he left, he pressed a hand firmly in thanks, as if a bond could be signed that way without ink. The door closed soft, and the room felt lighter for the visit, the cups drying in a row by the sink. There was an office to set right too, and that was done by habit more than by rules. A morning tram carried the body along its rattle and sway, the same route taken many times for trade reports that had been dull enough to pass any test. Inside, the clerk at the front nodded and pushed the ledger across, and a signature was written with the same careful hand used for everything that mattered. Shelves were cleared of nothing more than personal scraps, an old blotter, a postcard of a hilltop, a stub of pencil that had sat faithful near the phone. The supervisor made a speech with polite phrases while checking the calendar, and it was clear he thought of schedules and deliveries and not the weight beneath the surface. A small bundle of keys was placed in his open palm, and his fingers closed like his mind had already moved to the next task. The press of cold metal against the skin as that last set was carried down the hall felt like the end of a habit, not just the end of a job. Outside, a colleague lifted a hand in a wave and asked about plans for New Year, and a safe answer was given that had the shape of truth. The tram stop took the waiting without complaint, and the city's shadow fell at a familiar angle across the pavement as the day went on. Before the suitcases were filled, there was a walk to be taken, because a city could not be left in a hurry after so many years of practice and patience. Feet found the old turns without thought, a left by the corner kiosk, a right where the birches lined the path, a pause near the bridge that had served well as a place to measure a watcher's stride. No one shadowed today. People moved with their own cares, heads tucked down against the season, while buses hissed and doors clapped. The old metro entrance stood as it always had, tiles chipped near the rail, a plastic sign hanging a bit crooked over the stairs. The escalator carried a steady run of faces down into the glow below, and the hum of the moving steps filled the throat of the station with a soft, droning note. A bench where a newspaper had once covered a handoff looked like any seat in any park, streaked by weather, occupied by a couple sharing a sandwich. Near the trolley stop, a brick that had once given way to a careful touch now sat firm under a fresh smear of mortar, the corner patched by some neat worker who knew nothing of its use. At each stop, a breath was taken, a small nod made, not as farewell to secrets but as thanks to places that had kept their silence. The route led back by habit, and the door closed on the flat with the same quiet latch as always. There had been one more meeting to keep, not for planning, but for ending. The driver took a slow route through familiar streets, and the building chosen was as ordinary as a school, which helped more than anything else. Inside a bare room, a comrade from the older days waited with a folder already open and a pen placed square on its edge. No ceremony marked the start. A few questions were asked, not to test memory, but to make sure nothing had been left hidden where it could trip someone later. The answers came at an easy pace, since they lived in the bones after so long. A few pages were signed, and a packet of names was marked as closed. The pages turned back and forth to be sure. The light from a high window showed dust in the air with each movement, and the quiet helped the focus stay on the work. When it was done, the pen made a small, clean click as it dropped into its cap, and that tidy sound seemed to shut the drawer on a long shelf of days. Hands met across the table, not for praise, but for a simple thanks shared by people who had done hard tasks without saying much about them. The walk back felt shorter, and the city held its usual posture. Packing meant choosing what was needed and what could be left behind, which turned out to be easier than expected. Clothes went in first, plain and familiar, then the few books that had been read to tatters on long nights. A photograph or two, not for any authority to find, but for the mind to keep a picture of rooms and faces that had made all the quiet seem less narrow. The box of notes used for shopping lay open to show how often cabbage and potatoes had filled the week. In the corner, a battered kettle waited to be wrapped, the one constant that could bring a room together after a day of careful walking and timed turns. Dust had gathered under the bed frame as it always did, and a rag dealt with it before the cases closed. The smell of soap rose as the floor was wiped in calm strokes, the scent clean and simple, like a small promise that the room would be ready for the next person who needed four walls. The curtains were folded, the window latch was tested, the light switch was flicked once as a habit pressed itself forward. The last drawer was shut with 2 fingers, and stayed shut. When the lock turned for what felt like the last time, it sounded like any other day, and that had its comfort. Leaving did not look like a movie. It looked like a call to a driver, a wait on the stairs with a suitcase, a nod to the woman who kept the block in order, and a lift of the bag into the back seat. The road took them past the market, past the schoolyard, past a row of posters that had been changed more than once as the wind shifted the words of leaders. No one watched from a doorway. No one followed on a corner. The driver asked about the best route to avoid a jam near the bridge, and the answer was given without a glance over the shoulder. The ring road showed its familiar curve, while trucks kept their slow pace in the outer lane, and the sky spread low and white across the edge of the city. A hand reached forward to touch the dashboard when the car paused, an old habit of keeping balance on sharp stops that stayed even when no one pressed hard on the brakes. The steady vibration of the engine through the seat filled the gaps in talk, a soft buzz that had always meant motion without announcement. At the gate, papers were shown that were simple and direct, and a guard waved the car through without study. The suitcase came down with a thud, and the path carried on. And so, our time in the Soviet Union comes to an end. The city lights fade, the codes are burned, and the last signal is sent. Until our next story together, rest well, dream deep, and good night.